My name is John, and this December has been particularly challenging for me. My wife Anna, who works at a large company, was up to her ears in work. Her department was preparing to launch an important project right before Christmas. She would leave early in the morning and return after dark, completely exhausted. "I'm sorry, honey, this week is going to be crazy," she said apologetically as she was getting ready for work. "I promise, during the holidays I'll be all yours." I nodded understandingly, although I was a bit disappointed inside. We traditionally prepared for Christmas together, but this year I would have to manage on my own, or as it turned out later, not quite alone. On Wednesday, my mother-in-law Linda called. In her ringing voice, she complained that she was completely tangled up in garlands and boxes of decorations and asked for help. "John, dear, could you drop by after work? I really need a man's hand in this pre-holiday fuss." I readily agreed. After all, Linda is like a second mother to me, and I didn't have much else to do anyway. Besides, decorating the house together is a great way to lift your spirits. In the evening, I went to Linda's, anticipating how we would decorate the Christmas tree and hang garlands around the house. Maybe we would even laugh over Coco, remembering funny stories from past Christmases. In general, I was sincerely happy for the opportunity to brighten up the loneliness and help a loved one. If only I had known what this seemingly innocent request would turn into. If I could have foreseen what secrets and temptations this seemingly ordinary pre-holiday evening held. Perhaps everything would have turned out differently. But as they say, what happened, happened. From the doorstep I was greeted by warmth and the smell of gingerbread cookies. Linda, flushed and unusually disheveled, hugged me and immediately handed me a box of Christmas tree decorations. "Finally, John, I thought I'd have to decorate the whole house alone," she laughed, winking. I smiled back and, taking off my jacket, got to work. We spent the next couple of hours untangling garlands, hanging balls and bells, and mounting a holiday reindeer on the roof. We chatted about this and that, laughed when someone couldn't get something right. In short, we behaved like good relatives, sincerely enjoying each other's company. When the decorations were done, Linda suggested having a cup of hot chocolate. "You remember, I have my own special recipe," she winked, taking out cocoa and marshmallows from the cupboard. Of course I remembered. Linda's cocoa is a real treat, with notes of cinnamon and nutmeg. I always asked Anna to find out how her mother makes such delicious cocoa, what the secret ingredient is. But even she would forget to do it, enjoying this delightful taste. Sitting on the couch in the living room, we slowly sipped the fragrant drink and admired the work of our hands. The Christmas tree blinked with multicolored lights, candle glare danced on the walls. The house looked fabulously cozy. "I love this time of year," Linda said dreamily, sipping from her mug. "People become kinder. There is some kind of magic in the air. Everything is like in childhood." I nodded in agreement. Now, sitting next to my mother-in-law in this almost intimate atmosphere, I myself felt as if I had returned to my carefree boyhood years, when the biggest problem was what gift to ask Santa for. We sat and talked for a long time that evening. We recalled funny moments from past family holidays, discussed traditions, shared dreams and plans. I suddenly caught myself thinking that I had never communicated so soulfully with Linda before, or with Anna for that matter. When the clock struck midnight, I reluctantly got up to go home. Linda walked me to the door and hugged me tightly as we said goodbye. "Thank you, John. You're a real knight. You helped an old woman out," she whispered, pecking me on the cheek. For some reason, shivers ran down my spine. Attributing it to fatigue, I said goodbye and went home. All the way, pleasant memories of the evening kept spinning in my head. As I was falling asleep, I thought about how great it is to have such a wonderful mother-in-law, and how nice it is that I can brighten up her loneliness during these pre-holiday days. If only I had known what was in store for me, perhaps I wouldn't have been so carefree. The next few days turned into a whirlwind of lights, smells, and Christmas bustle. Linda and I, without agreeing, got a taste for it. Every evening I would come to her after work, and we would think of how else we could decorate the house. Rearranging the garland on the fireplace, putting a snowman at the porch. And then we would sit in the kitchen until late in the evening, sipping mulled wine and talking about everything in the world. During these evenings, I learned more about my mother-in-law than in all the years of our acquaintance. It turns out that in her youth, she dreamed of becoming an actress and even played in an amateur theater. And once she went alone to a jazz festival in New Orleans, got into trouble there, but came out of it with honor. Linda, in general, as it turned out, had a very stormy temperament in her youth. Not like now, a staid and homely lady. You know, with age you realize that the most important thing in life is family and loved ones. And adventures, romance. That's for those who haven't turned 40 yet, she joked, pouring me some hot wine. I listened to these stories with bated breath. Each time, Linda's image opened up to me from a new side, evoking involuntary admiration, and I caught myself thinking that I was more and more fascinated by her, not only as a mother-in-law, but also as a woman. I don't know what came over me during those days. Perhaps the magic of Christmas went to my head. Or maybe I was too tired of the routine and mundaneness of my life. But I began to notice something strange about myself. I looked at Linda differently than before. I admired how deftly she handled the decorations, how dimples played on her cheeks when she laughed. I waited impatiently for the evening to see her again, to chat, to be near. On the fourth day of our decorating marathon, we tackled the fireplace. Having placed Christmas stockings for gifts on it, we began to wrap it with pine branches, and then our hands accidentally touched. It was like an electric shock. I froze, meeting Linda's gaze. For the first time in all these days, I saw not just friendly warmth in her eyes, but something more. Some kind of spark flashed, immediately extinguished. "Oh, sorry," Linda pulled her hand away, slightly embarrassed. But in her voice, I fancied not the usual cheerfulness, but a slight tremor. We continued working, but the tension didn't go away. A strange awkwardness hung in the air, which had never been between us before. I suddenly acutely felt Linda's closeness, her scent, familiar and at the same time exciting. An unfamiliar heat spread in my chest. That evening passed in some kind of haze. We quickly finished with the fireplace, drank a mug of cocoa in the kitchen, exchanged routine phrases, and said goodbye. Already sitting in the car, I was frantically trying to understand what it was. Was it all my imagination? Or was there really a spark between us that wasn't there before? I drove these thoughts away. I was ashamed to admit it to myself, but my heart was pounding like crazy, and my whole world seemed to have turned upside down, all from a single touch. The next morning I woke up with a firm intention to stop all this incomprehensible confusion. I decided that I needed to take a little break from Linda's company, come to my senses, return my thoughts to their usual course. Therefore, when she called and asked me to help with the final touches in decorating the house, I pleaded fatigue and politely refused. All day I was languishing at work, unable to concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to the previous evening, to that strange moment by the fireplace. I was angry with myself for behaving like a sniveling boy, imagining God knows what. After all, Linda is almost like a mother to me. What kind of sparks and hints can there be? By evening, I couldn't stand it and decided to stop by her after all, at least to make sure that I had imagined everything yesterday. And that we are still good relatives, nothing more. Linda opened the door in an apron smeared with flour. Judging by the painfully familiar aroma coming from the kitchen, she was baking gingerbread cookies. "John, I wasn't expecting you today," she smiled in surprise. "Decided to drop by after all?" "Yes, I thought maybe you still need help," I mumbled awkwardly, crossing the threshold. In fact, everything in the house was already shining and sparkling. Help was clearly not needed, but I couldn't admit that I had rushed here, driven by some strange emotions and desires. "Well, actually, I've already finished everything myself," Linda smiled slyly. "But come in, try my signature cookies. The first batch is just ready." I obediently went to the kitchen, secretly admiring Linda, flushed from the heat of the stove. Unwanted thoughts about how good she looked started swarming in my head again. Pushing them away with an effort of will, I sat down at the table and reached for a cookie. We drank tea and chattered as if nothing had happened. Linda told me how she once baked a whole mountain of gingerbread men for the Christmas fair at the school where Anna was studying. I laughed, listening to the story of how Anna diligently painted these cookies with icing in all the colors of the rainbow. Gradually, the tension began to subside. I was almost convinced that yesterday was just the product of my tired imagination. But then Linda got up to pour more tea, and accidentally brushed against me with her hip. A shiver ran down my spine again, and it became difficult to breathe. She was saying something, but I didn't hear. Blood was pounding in my temples. My throat was dry. Linda suddenly fell silent and looked at me with some new expression, as if seeing me for the first time. I don't know which of us reached out first. I only remember that the next moment we were already kissing, greedily, frantically, as if it was our last kiss in life. Her lips were soft and sweet from powdered sugar. Her tongue insistently slipped into my mouth. It was madness, sheer madness. To hug my own mother-in-law, to stroke her back, to bury my fingers in her hair. But I couldn't stop anymore, and I didn't want to. Somehow we made it to the bedroom, tearing off each other's clothes on the way. We fell on the bed, tightly entwined. Everything after that was like in a fog: hot kisses, feverish caresses, faltering whispers. We made love with abandon, passionately, as if for the last time. It was some kind of explosion of emotions and sensations. I had never experienced anything like it in my life, even with Anna in the heyday of our passionate youth. It seemed that time itself had stopped, leaving us alone in this small, cozy little world. Afterwards, lying in each other's arms, we were silent. The realization of what had happened was slowly sinking in, like a suffocating blanket. What have we done? How do we live with this now? John, Linda began, but I interrupted her, putting a finger to her lips. Don't. Let's just be quiet, okay? I need to think. She nodded and nestled against me, hiding her face on my chest, and I lay there staring blindly at the ceiling, trying to calm my wildly beating heart. My head was in complete turmoil. Betrayal, deception, shame, guilt, fear of exposure, and at the same time, some kind of aching tenderness, gratitude, desire to protect this fragile moment from the whole world. Emotions were tearing me apart. For the next half hour, we were getting ready, not looking at each other. We tried to pretend that nothing had happened. As we parted, Linda pressed against me for a moment and whispered, "Whatever happens next, know that I don't regret it. It was magical." All the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unreality of what was happening. As if someone had entered my body and controlled it all this crazy evening. As if a snow whirlwind had spun and carried me beyond the familiar world, where there are rules, morality, and common sense. Lying sleeplessly next to the snoring Anna, I was feverishly thinking about how to live on. One thing was clear: we must keep this secret at all costs. Too much is at stake. Families, relationships with loved ones, our whole settled life. But will I be able to look my wife in the eye after everything that happened? And how to be around Linda now at family gatherings, parties, at the Christmas table? Won't an involuntary glance or an accidental gesture give us away? I didn't sleep a wink that night, and in the morning I made the only right decision, as it seemed to me, to pretend that nothing happened, and pray that Linda would also find the strength to do the same. The next few days before Christmas turned into a kind of hell for me. I went to work, smiled at my colleagues, discussed the menu for the holiday dinner with Anna, and all the time I felt like the last deceiver. Lying to my wife turned out to be disgustingly nauseating. Every time I met her clear, loving gaze, I was ready to sink through the ground. And when she hugged or kissed me tenderly, everything inside me clenched with shame and guilt. At the same time, I constantly caught myself thinking about Linda. I remembered our night, her body, her smell. I longed for that sincerity and openness that suddenly arose between us. And the next moment, I hated myself for these thoughts. How can I? I have a wife, after all. Linda and I hardly communicated these days. We crossed paths a couple of times in passing when I picked up Anna from work. We exchanged awkward glances, but neither by word nor by gesture did we betray our secret. I was already beginning to hope that somehow we would be able to get through this, that the sharpness of experiences would smooth out, and we would be able to return to normal life. But then Christmas struck and brought new trials. This year we decided to celebrate the holiday at Linda's so that she wouldn't be sad alone. Anna suggested it herself, and it would have been suspicious to refuse. So on the evening of December 24th, I rang her doorbell, numb with tension. We were greeted by a Christmas tree shining with lights, the smell of spices and roasted turkey, and Linda herself, beautiful, solemn, in an emerald green dress. Seeing me, she only slightly blushed and looked away. All evening, we tried to pretend that nothing had changed. We joked, laughed, raised toasts, unwrapped gifts. Only occasionally would our eyes meet, and in them I read the same doubts and questions that tormented me. How to live on with this secret? And is it worth our suffering? The night passed calmly, no ambiguous situations or hints. Retiring to the bedrooms, Linda only hugged me for a moment, supposedly in a family way, and whispered in my ear, "Merry Christmas, John. Be happy." Her closeness made my throat catch, but I restrained myself. I nodded and replied just as quietly, "You too, Linda. Thank you for everything." In this everything, I put much more than just gratitude for dinner and hospitality, and judging by her eyes, she understood. The following weeks and months were a real test. Life flowed in its usual course, but I felt that something in me had broken, as if a thin crack had passed through my entire existence. I still loved Anna. I tried to be a good husband. I diligently went to work, met with friends, made plans for the future, but a part of me remained there, in Linda's house, in her arms, in that magical, crazy world that gave me a fleeting but so acute happiness. We never spoke about what had been between us. In public and in private, we were pointedly even-tempered and friendly. Looking from the outside, no one would have suspected what storms were raging in our souls. Only once, when I was helping Linda clear the dishes after a family celebration, our hands accidentally touched, and I felt her fingers tremble and slightly squeeze my palm. Just for a moment, but it was enough for my heart to go into a frenzied beat. I often think about that December, about its special atmosphere which mixed coziness and hope, anxiety and anticipation of a miracle, about the smell of gingerbread cookies and the twinkling of garlands, and of course, about Linda. I don't know how our lives would have turned out if that flash of passion hadn't happened between us. Would it have been calmer, more prosperous, or on the contrary, more boring and dull? We'll never know now. One thing I know for sure, that brief moment outside of time and space, stolen from fate, will stay with me forever, as a reminder that each of us has secret desires and impulses, and sometimes they break through the everyday thickness, bright, like flashes of the northern lights. Linda and I made our choice. We decided to leave what happened in the past and live on as duty and reason dictate. It was the right adult choice, but deep in my heart, I will always keep the memory of that special pre-Christmas season, about the magic that suddenly awakened between two people tired of the ordinary, about the miracle that gave us a few moments of true intimacy. After all, life is good not only for its regularity and constancy, but also for the rare, blinding flashes of what people call love, even if it flared up in the wrong place and with the wrong person, even if it is not destined to ignite in full force. I will always cherish our little secret, Linda, tenderly and carefully as the most precious memory, and let the whole world consider us only a mother-in-law and son-in-law. We know that once, even if not for long, we became much more. After all, real miracles do not happen only at Christmas. Sometimes a sincere impulse of two lonely hearts towards each other is enough for them. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.